See, a little background about what I have been doing. Paramahansa Yogananda is my guru. He lived between 1893 and 1952. Almost 30 years he spent in US, and he set up an organization which is Self-Realization Fellowship there. And then Yogadas Satsang Society of India was set up in 1917 in India. So these are the same organizations under the same umbrella. And the presence was almost negligible in India, but in late 50s, Dayama, who was the head of the organization, she came and lived in India and set up the organization. So it grew in India from that time onwards. Even today, it's a very small and unknown group. But the unique thing about this path is that people have been practicing meditation for 30, 40 years. And most vouch for the direct experience and of what the scriptures say. So I have used for this presentation one source, Introduction, Principal Upanishads by Sarvepalli Radhakrishna. In that book, he had taken almost around 150 pages. There is an introduction. So basically, though it's an introduction, it covers the summary of those principal Upanishads of that book. And second thing is the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda, which I have learned, and these teachings are emanated only through lessons. So it's written, we get it home and we read them and we practice them. And at some stage when we take the Diksha, Kriya Yoga Diksha, we will take an oath that we will be practicing every morning and evening the Kriya Yoga, which is nothing but a sort of inner pranayama. So that oath we take, and come what may, whether we are well or not well, we do this morning and evening, every day without fail. So this is the basis, and I have been doing this for the last 15 years, Kriya Yoga, but meditating from quite some time. So this is the background. Jai Guru is the greeting what we have in Yogadas Satsang Society here. So I just put that there. So before we start a prayer, I wrote in English so that it's very clear to everybody. Beloved God, lead us from unreality to reality, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. I think all of you know the sloka in Sanskrit, but I thought translation in English would be easier for everyone. So, normally, as rational human beings, we feel responsible, and we want to connect with the past, with the future, and we want to live in time as well as with eternity. Eternity means we connect. We want to live long. We want to see what happens in the future, what happened in the past. So this is our, in our nature to do all these things. It's not, we just don't be there to live today. So we need a connect. A lot of developments, a lot of achievements are there in science and technology. But the basic problems of human life, and the destiny, these have not been superseded by this technology and science developments. So this is a fact of life. Not only now, it has been like this for ages. The basic problems of human life are the same almost, even though the external things have changed, the health conditions and other things have improved. Lifestyles have changed. The problems have not been completely eliminated by science and technology. So whenever we stand perplexed and confused before the future with no clear light or no clear guidelines, we don't know how it will be. The power of human soul is the only refuge. So we get that from inside, what is correct. So we have been using this from inside, what is when scriptures or whatever we know. We don't get a clear light to guide our way, we use the power of human soul. So this has been for everybody. It has been this same. So one thing we all, if we look deeply, all human endeavors are directed towards maximizing happiness and minimizing pain. When we are born, what we do is we see what makes us happy and we continue to do that. And if something is causing pain, we just try to reject that, minimize that, avoid that. So everything we do, we learn, we sing to make us happy. So this is the bottom line. That anything that makes us happy, when we see our achievements gives us happiness, so we go for the achievements. So this is what it has been. Everything we do, we like, we marry, everything that gives happiness only we try to maximize or increase, and minimize what is happening. But there is always a context. Once you take a decision, you have both happiness and pain comes. So these are part of life, and we learn it as we grow from childhood. There's one thing here I want to bring. This is a short letter written by one lady. She's a Quaker. To her unmarried daughter, she wrote, was suffering from loneliness. So she writes that the loneliness thou speaks of, I know. For do not think, darling, that it is confined to only unmarried people. It is real in the lives that have plenty of human ties, husbands, children, friends. Even for all of them, this loneliness is there. And it is the loneliness of this world life, loneliness of the hearts that are made for union with God. So this is one very important thing she says is, the hearts are made or designed for union with God, but they have not realized it fully. I believe it is inseparable for humanity, from humanity. I believe that God has ordained it in the very nature of things by creating us for himself alone. So this is something very unusual what this lady wrote, that she says God has made us for himself alone. And he rarely allows any human love to be completely satisfying. Just that this loneliness may drive us to him. There's an attraction that he'll never let anything of the world satisfy us fully. He always draws towards himself. I have noticed that when human love is satisfying, something always comes to spoil it. Either there is a death, or there is a separation, or there is a change of feeling on one side or the other, or something. And the heart is driven out of his human resting place to God alone. So ultimately, this we see, we buy things, we have so many achievements come, but after a while, it stops satisfying us. And I think this is the very nature of things, that he wants us to go back to him. So, and what she says is, if you can see this and settle down to it, it will help you very much. Thou will give up, as I have, any expectation of finding complete satisfaction in creature. The other thing I have added, in things or in situations, you will no longer suffer from disappointment at not finding it. And this will deliver thee from the worst part of suffering from loneliness. Thee will accept this as God-given blessing, only to drive thee to himself. So this is the context. A monk had sent this to me some time back, just for us to understand what's happening within us. And this is written by one Hannah Whittle Smith. She's a Quaker. She's from Pennsylvania. I think some of you in US may know about this community. So here I write, from joy I came, for joy I live, and in that sacred joy I melt away. So this is what I said in the previous slide. So this joy, Taittiriya Upanishad, this is from, I have taken from there. So essentially we have come from joy and we live for joy, and we again go back into that. This is the spirit. Now here, just about Brahman, a word used very in Upanishads quite frequently. Uh, what is this? So, what is this world rooted in? What is the basis? What is fundamentals of what we are in? What we see, is this all? Is the world of multiplicity? Whatever we see, can all this be reduced to one single reality which reveals itself to our senses in different forms? So we have our five senses. The whole world is being revealed to us through these five senses. And is there something, one core thing that is reality through various forms? Is it showing to us? Is there any such thing? And what is it that remains identical and persists through change? We have seen generations of human, over thousands of years. We don't know where it started, how it started. Is there anything that remains all the time watching what's happening and which is persistent to change, or is it on auto? These are some of the questions we have in mind. And when we start our spiritual quest, and the word that Upanishads use for the supreme reality is Brahman. This I just use this to set the context. And what is that? It's eternity. That means it has been there for ages, all the time. It will be there when we all vanish. Also, this earth will be there, but this will be there, and it will guide the same way it's guiding us. And it's pure. It's something like oil just coming forth, gushing forth, it's bubbling over. A ceaseless growth is happening. So some of the things that describe Brahman is the creative principle, the cause of all existence. Everything comes from this. The reality of Brahman is based on the fact of spiritual experience. So how do we know all this? We know the questions, but is it real? Does such a thing exist? So for the authors of the Upanishads and for the saints and sages, this has been their personal experience. They have experienced this, and from that this has come. Is it replicable? It means, can we also experience this? These are some of the things we look for. Then we have Atman. See, we all have inspired moments, and we see something coming from us, within us, which we ourselves don't know. And that same thing is excellent, and it makes us go through most tough situations, makes us climb great heights and achievements which we ourselves can't think of. These things, it is there, and it is in each one of us. So what is that? So that is named as Atma. It's a principle of man's life. It's something that pervades us, through our body, through our breath, through our intellect. And sometimes we have understanding which is not based on logic or reasoning or anything. The prajna, what we call. And it comes through all that. And this is something that pervades all of us. Each one of us is having this, and that's called Atman. What is it? Can it be pointed out where it is? Can it be, is it something that is discerned or discovered by human where it is and what is its nature? No, but it can be felt. So our true self is pure existence. So that's the one. If that is the one, body can perish. We can see it's changing, everything happening, but this one is pure existence, and this is unconditioned by the forms of mind and intellect. That's nurturing us. Is it there? Can it be experienced? So in relation to the universe, if the whole world, whatever we see in the forms, what we see through our five senses and through infrared, whatever range, the whole thing is a play of the manifestation of Brahman. It's come from him. A part of it is visible to us, known to us, and we have expanded our sensory perceptions by going infrared and ultraviolet, various ranges, and we are able to see more than what is only visibly available to us, what is visible to us. So like that, the individual egos, the varied expressions, what we see of the one universal self, each one of us. But once it comes to us, we see independent, we see things different. This And these two, this Atman, which is because it is part of the whole Brahman, what the Atman, the what we have within us, is part of it. And there is an affinity between these two. The fundamental affinity, that's a longing, love, that I want to go and merge with that Brahman. So this is the attractive force that is working in the universe. The one which is within us, which is being attracted, it wants to go and reach with Brahman, and the merger will give us the happiness and joy which otherwise it's not possible. So this is one force, attractive force. There is another force that is acting, that is, just let me see the it's creating problems sharing. So Atman is the foundational reality underlying the conscious powers of individual. Individually it is there. And that's the one that is giving us life, that is giving us power, that's giving us understanding. It's the inward ground of the human soul. So can this be experienced? Can this be known where it is? So this is if this is the attractive force, there's another force that is called Maya. It's a repulsive force, but only repulsive means not in the sense that it is something that uses repulsion, but it's outward force that makes us look outwards. So it makes us see the world around us, it deludes us into thinking that only this exists. Only what we can see, what we can experience, this is all that exists. As far as matter is concerned, as far as people is concerned. But we still can't explain what's happening within us, why that differences we have between people, why each one looks differently. So so this is, when we look outwards, it deludes us into thinking that this is the world, the whole world as it exists, this is all that is there. And we have to live with it. So we have come into this, and this all we see, we experience this, we keep doing things that gives us satisfaction, happiness, whatever causes pain, we try to avoid. So this is the Maya, the force that makes us look outward. And this is the delusive character of the world. This is called Maya. Maya is it really there? It's something that we attach from our side to the world and the way we look at things. So for that, we call it Maya. So it is like a covering that is there, a body sheath that is there in front of us. Supposing I have a chashma and it has 4, 5 layers, 5, 6 layers, 8 layers in front of me of translucent things. Or I'm not saying translucent, different colors. Then what I see is the truth is not visible. There's something that is hiding us. And what is it that is hiding us? So what is hiding us from seeing the ultimate truth? What it happens, this ignorance, it's called avidya. But I've avoided using the words which are mentioned in Upanishads, just so that we focus on the differences, the understanding is not brought into this discussion. So this ignorance, it gives us manifests as egoism. And egoism doesn't mean pride in that way. A sense of individuality, that we are different from others. It gives an attachment also to what we like, what we want. And it also gives aversion and blind tenacity. We want to stick to it. So these are the things that the Maya, the force that takes us outward, it makes us look at. There are 8 bondages. When I said the filters are the different things are there in us that won't allow us to see what is the reality, the existence of Atman or Brahman. What is that? It is the hatred. What we have: hatred, shame, fear, grief, condemnation, race prejudice, all sorts of prejudice, the pride, the smugness, that I'm more intelligent, I'm less intelligent than that fellow. So this we are seized with all this all the time. This is existing in each one of us in various degrees. As we grow, some of the things may fall away, and if things are good, certain things fear may not be there. It may go away over a period of time. But for each individual in various degrees, these things are the ones that prevent us from seeing what is the true nature of us. So as long as we identify with the body, and as long as we don't look within and identify ourselves with that soul or true self, whatever we call it, So what happens is we want this, but there is an urge in us to merge with the Brahman, merge with the Brahman, that love is there. So that desire we try to satisfy it through external means, through achievements, through possessions, through relationships, through love what we get. But as we have seen that that lady talking to her daughter, God makes this in such a way that this can be very rarely it can satisfy us completely, because the satisfaction can only come when that soul merges with the Brahman. Till that time, we keep on like musk deer. You heard about musk deer. At some point of time in its life, its fragrance comes, musk, and it gets mad. It's so lovely. It gets mad and it keeps searching everywhere, and it gets mad. But it doesn't realize it's within itself, and from itself this smell is coming, and it roams and roams, and it gets totally mad. So we in a way we are like that. The one which we want, which satisfies us, is within us, but we keep looking at it from outside, from friendships, from all activities. Various. Can this satisfy us fully? It's not. It doesn't. So to satisfy these things, this we have to appear again and again on the stage of reincarnation, again and again. We keep coming, and whatever comes with it, the troubles in some life, we may have some good things, some may not be bad things. So this whole thing is the one that puts us in this endless cycle. So at some point, man understands that this is I'm blinded by this Maya, the one that my natural urge to look outside for my this thing, for my satisfaction, for my happiness. And then he realizes, see, this is not, I'm not getting this, whatever I want, it's not satisfying me completely. There's something else I should do. And then at that stage, he starts looking. That's the way the start of spiritual path. You start getting on the spiritual path. And when you're curious, automatically there's a Brahman, God there to help us. He also wants us to come to him. So what he does, he places in front of us books. He places in front of us through whatever means, through our natural tendencies, whatever we are inclined to listen, we're inclined to respond positively. Through those things, he keeps feeding us information. But when you are ready, a guru also makes an appearance in your life. So the whole, this is how I. So once this realization comes, that liberation from the bondage of Maya, see, it doesn't mean this is bad. We all have been enjoying this, and nothing wrong with that. But we realize that this has a limitation, and to get out of this, bondage of Maya, this becomes the primary object. And it happens not just for one; it happens for everyone. Because ultimately, only when that Atman is merged with Brahman, when this will be completely satisfied. Until that time, we keep searching, we keep looking for that. So when we have setbacks, we all of us don't like setbacks, but they are actually good. Because every time we get a setback, whatever we want doesn't happen, something painful happens, we think that they are bad. Actually, they are good. They are good in the sense that they are brought to us that, okay, now you start looking within, looking what is obvious, look within and see why this thing has happened. It's a prod by God himself. You look within, Baba, you've been enjoying this, fine, but now you look within. So every time that happens, and when we look back, not only for me, I think it must be for everybody. At those moments, we have actually grown. Every setback, we have grown. We have looked beyond. When we are happy, nothing, we learn less. But when we have problems, we learn more. So here comes the spiritual path. So having learned this, so how do we go about? What does the scriptures say? Whether it's not scriptures, it's a practical science. So one of the first things is that we should have faith. Faith that that as it is a trust in the universe. Universe means God, whatever you name it. It's reliable, and it's essential sound. It's decent one. And it's not going to harm us. It's not going to. It's a starting point. So this faith is very important. That whole universe, God is there to help me to get out of this predicament. He's trying to tell me, show me something where I need to change, where I need to improve myself, where I need to change my attitudes. So I look at things from different perspective. So that faith is there, the trust that there's a decent, is soundness and decency of the universe. So this is first required. And there's an ethical and moral preparation. Without that, we can't. How do we remove these filters? It's so easy to say that I have so many filters, but how do these disappear? When can we see reality? Is it easy? When we are young, we are seized by these hormones, by this sexual urge we have. So we are seized. It's not easy to get out of that. So it takes time, age, like the progression from childhood to adulthood and then to Vruddhapyam, what we call. This itself is the one that takes us into this uh, the strong tendencies which are laid siege on us. So these will start slowly vanishing, and it is so the life itself, the journey itself is a spiritual path, but that's not enough. So ethical, moral preparation is a must. So we must clear our natures to reach the goal. So selfish desires, I want this, I want that. At some stage, we have to stop asking for this and surrender our attachment, whatever we want, whatever we hold very dear. That this is what I need. We have to come out of that. This, and then we have to be bereft of egotism. What is egotism? Talking good, talking high about ourselves, thinking high about ourselves, and thinking that we are superior, inferior. So this sort of things, which actually these are the filters that prevent us from looking. So some of these things we need to let go. Let go in word, in thought, in action, in belief. Not just we say I've given up all possessions, but that's not the case. When it actually goes away, you realize how dear it is. When you lose a close relation, your parent, you realize how attached you are. Till that time, you say, I don't have attachment with my father, with my mother, my wife. But that's not the case. It is there. So we must give up. Another thing is pride of learning. This pride of learning, pride of achievement. So this also we need to give up. Pride of. So we become, in a way, we are giving up these things which are actually holding us. And this has to be done consciously. So this is not done in meditation alone. And there's a discipline that's required, a change of mind, change of heart. Both these are also demanded, and only then the progress will happen. So then, when all this we start giving up, the quietening of mind. There's a continuous chatter. All of us have this continuous chatter happening in the mind. It's we are good, we are bad. Maya, this is what Maya does. That fellow is better. He's doing better. He's doing less. I'm better. So this sort of continuous chatter on every issue, it keeps happening in our mind. And I think all of us will have its mental rambling and empty desires. We are planning continuously, we are visualizing, we are dreaming. So these things are laid siege on our head. How can we look at reality when we are seized of this all the time? So we must silence our speech, our mind, not only our will also. We have strong will. Many people, achievers, have strong will. So they want to make things happen. That will also you need to silence. Let things happen. So the individual should develop the habit of introversion. Introversion is looking within, abstracting from the outside world. Withdraw from that. If something comes, withdraw and then see what does it mean to me? What does this tell me from a higher perspective? This process of abstraction, we get behind knowing, feeling, this what we are getting from senses and willing. So by this process of abstraction, we're actually going slightly behind, pushing those things, that feedback that is coming to us, so this is good, this is bad, what our mind is telling us. So we try to push back all that. So we try to go behind that. Can this be done consciously? Yes, it can. So there's another thing very important. Purification has to happen. It's a cleansing process, cleansing process. Antaranga Shuddhi is one word which people use. So that purity, how will it happen? This is another, we have to be very mindful. This is not an intellectual exercise. Purity of intellect is different from congestion of it. Congestion means what? We keep on adding many things. And once it is full, the mind is full, there will be purity. Each of these will start acting and engage our mind. So there's a purity of intellect is different from congestion of it. To attain the purity of vision, we require childlike nature. So that kalmasham, we should make our nature kalmasham lekunda untaru. Like children are like that. That's the word. So we have to tranquilize our senses because they are taking us outward and engaging us fully. Only then we will be able to see. Simplifying the heart. The heart has desires. This and cleansing the mind. So each of this has to happen. This purification process has to happen. And this also has to happen consciously. Whenever our mind tells us, you do this, you get a chance, to get above another person, to gain more. So this sort of selfish thing is the mind that keeps on prodding us. So we have to push back these things. And only then we will be able to see. Only the pure in heart can see God. This is what the Bible says, this is what all scriptures say. So are we ready for it? And this process of spiritual path is, this preparation has to happen. So all these things, only when they happen, we can really go on the path. There is a detachment, another thing. So the detachment means things go bad, we don't take it to heart. So we engage with it, engage in a difficult situation. When to us, to our loved ones, it's happening. We are fully there. We are not running away from it. But at the same time, there's a detachment within us that doesn't seize us. Why attachment actually creates us emotions, seizes us, and it allows us. It doesn't allow us to be rational human being. So detachment actually helps us to look within. So it's return to its inward quiet and fix its attention on the essential self. So even as we are doing things for others, even as we are engaged in full activity, what we do is the mind remains silent and the heart, the soul which is there, through that, whatever it guides, we will be doing the action. So is this possible? Yes, it is. We see Roger Federer playing tennis. When he is in full flow, is there any mind? It's a state of zero mind. Rama keeps talking. He was in the zone, he says. It's a state of zero mind. All of us have experienced that. That's a state of zero mind. That means there's no interference of the empirical intellect in those. Only that means actually it's the way one word is God is flowing through us. So excellence or ultimate excellence or purity happens when God is flowing through us and when we are actually empty, totally empty. So we try, that will happen only with detachment. It's not indifference to the world. We are fully engaged to the world. So we do not, another thing what we have to bear in mind is we should not have contempt for the world. We have to engage in the world. So we do not raise ourselves above the world by contempt of the world. Spirit of renunciation doesn't mean neglect of duties. We free ourselves only from ritualistic duties. That means just for the heck of it, we do where we are not fully engaged. Those things only we try to avoid. This work by itself does not give liberation, but it sets the context. It's the way we are engaging in the world. How we are engaging with the world. So that tells us how we are growing. So that engagement is important for us, our day-to-day interactions, how we are interacting with people, how we are facing situations. They give feedback whether we are actually progressing on the spiritual. Then jnana, wisdom. All of us want wisdom. Where does this come? It is there. I remember when we were children, we used to say, the people who are uneducated should not be given right to vote. But is it, still the government gave at that time, our constitution gives them right to vote. They're not men of letters. They don't have any, they can't explain things the way scholars can. But There's a wisdom in them. And from that has come? Is it from engaging with the world, engaging with the situation? So this is what it is. The eternal wisdom is there, that is possessed, is not possessed by, it's not the knowledge possessed by any individual. It's the wisdom hidden behind the sheets of ignorance. That means within us, within each one of us, that Atman, it is got the full wisdom of life. Whatever is required for us to engage with the world, the wisdom is available with us. All we have to do is to keep throwing out the filters what we have and engage with that. It will come forth. So wisdom is the capacity, pure reason. When we say reason, it's not a mental exercise. It comes automatically. The capacity for fundamental truth. It is where it is the possession of the soul. It is there. It's already having it. Or we can say in a way that the soul is actually going and penetrating its own ground. That means whatever is holding at the sheath is going and merging with that and becoming one with the essential being. Brahman is merging with that. Then everything, all knowledge, when you see the scriptures, when you see the saints, each one, none of the saints talk about another scripture. Whatever comes through them is the scripture. It becomes a scripture. So it is already there in it. Only when we go and merge with that through meditation or whatever it means, so it becomes one with us. It springs from it out of necessity when it meditates on itself. So when you're meditating when itself, it goes that when the joining happens, that Atman going and merging with Brahman, when that happens, then this it springs forth. The wisdom comes automatically. This wisdom is eternal, universal. It cannot be destroyed, but it can be obscured by Maya. So all we are trying to do with the spiritual path is trying to get beyond Maya, beyond what we are seeing and what is laying siege on us. There is a scriptural study, but there is contemplation. So whatever we are seeing, whatever we are experiencing in meditation, whatever we are learning through the process of the spiritual path. So in all this, there is something that's coming from within. But all the same, we have scriptures, we have Upanishads, which tell us. So the tradition of thought, which is a mental exercise, it is there in the Upanishads all the time. There's discussion happening between son and father, between a disciple and guru. So through this, we have got this knowledge that has come. So this we lead up to the experience through intellectual knowledge. That means through knowledge, we come up to a certain stage. But after that, it has to be through experience. So for those who are incapable of integral insight means what I said, going within and getting that. So perception and inference, what comes through the scriptures, this is the only means available to us to see what is right, what is wrong. So there is a place for all this. It's not that we ignore everything, what knowledge that has come. So for those who cannot see, the reason which is not in contradiction with the scriptures becomes the eye. That means through whatever is in line with the scriptures, we follow. So this is fine. This is nothing wrong with it. So this is not the end. A direct communion and experience is what we all have to finally engage with at some stage. So knowledge formulated logically is not equivalent to direct and immediate apprehension of the self. The self here means Brahman. So unless we get this direct experience, whatever we get, it's not equal. So whatever words we use, whatever concepts we employ, they all fall short of the reality, what we are actually experiencing. See, there's so many words we can be a scholar, but can we describe the taste of a mango to a person who has never tasted mango? Is there a word that can describe? So it has to be tasted and experienced. So this is like that. At some stage, you have to go beyond this into experiencing what is happening. So no amount of theoretical knowledge can serve as a substitute for the practice of life in spirit. We need to experience these things. So contemplation is a way to cleanse our mind and heart, because without this, See, it's not that just we sit silently, things will happen. We need to get over these filters which are blocking our view. So we, on conscious level, we need to see, experience, understand, and then start giving up certain things. See, this is preventing me from seeing what is it, what is the reality. So I need to get these things out of my system, into my out of my system. That's the word. So we cannot stop there. See, once we see all this, God manifests in us. That means there's a love that comes. We don't find the irritations what of our life, the likes and dislikes, these start slowly going away. There's love, there's a uniformity, there's a sort of stability in you, and then you feel you don't find the difference between your son in need and somebody in need. You feel the same way. So this is the yoga, part of yoga, when you can feel the love for every human being, every living being. So this is progress that happens. I think I'm running short of time. I need to rush a little bit.
Yeah, 9:50. So you have still 30, 40 minutes here.
See, there's a divine grace. Does this happen automatically with the will that I want to be, I want tomorrow, I want to meditate? It doesn't happen. There's nothing can happen without divine grace. So the self cannot be realized except by those whom the self chooses. So grace is important. It will come when within us the desire becomes strong, the grace automatically follows. Through the grace only, when we are ready, the books come, the scriptures come. And when we have crossed that level, the guru comes. When we are ready to receive the knowledge, when we are ready to change ourselves, to change our attitudes, change our habits, and we want to improve ourselves. The guru, he is the one who places. So grace is there all the time. It's for us to see that we don't realize that it is there. Only when we are not ready, it doesn't come. It's as simple as that. So God, Saint Bernard also says the same thing. God vision is the fruit of strenuous effort and divine grace. Both are equally important. So yoga meditation, I don't know how to get this thing out. Yoga is a science of reuniting the soul with the spirit. This is what we are trying to do in meditation yoga. Several forms of meditations are there. We are free to use whatever symbols or whatever practices that our personal tendencies, whatever it suits us, we can use those things. So here a little bit about Patanjali's Ashtanga Yoga. This is important because this is for it's a practical guide. So yama niyama, that do's and don'ts, what we said, self-discipline, what I have covered there. So these are some of the things that are required for us to do. Earlier times, people used to do tapas, and tapas means sitting in one place for long periods and trying to do the same what we have discussed just now. But how can body be still for such a long time? Is it possible? A restless body. So we need to prepare the body. Yoga Satsang, which I follow, we have energization exercises where each part of the body is tensed and relaxed. And it's just 38 exercises we can do in 15 minutes. But once you do that, it's done with closed eyes, and you feel full of energy whole day. You visualize that energy is coming into your body, into the particular part, and then you tense and relax. It's very simple, and your concentration will be so for full day it works. And that this is done before we actually, it's 15 minutes it takes. So before sitting for meditation, we do this in the right posture. How do we sit? The right posture means you have a spine straight. The spine, because the currents, the prana, the currents are flowing through the spine. So we do that. Chin parallel, a little upwards we raise, and eyes raised upwards. We can bring it to the center if possible, but without straining. And then we can just raise the eyes. And half open we can keep or raise it. So this is some asana what we follow in meditation. And once we do that, the moment eyes comes down, thoughts come into your mind. So we realize that and we go back. So this sort of like aircraft driving, airplane driving, the course correction all the time. This happens in meditation continues. There are one of the greatest things, prana, mind and breath, the link between mind and breath and heart, and withdrawal of our attention from the senses. So these are all interlinked. I think that's one of the achievements of great achievements of rishis of ancient rishis. That this link, what between breath and the mind and the heart and the sense withdrawal of energy from the senses. This happens, and this is what we call pranayama. Sometimes done consciously, sometimes with effort, sometimes like Hongsa Soham is something which where we observe breath. When we observe breath, it becomes very faint, and all of us, if you notice, just sit and observe breath. You just put your hand on your heart. It must be beating at certain level. Just observe what is happening closely. Don't regulate. Observe, and you will notice suddenly, immediately the breath becomes, if it is very shy, it becomes slow. Just by observing, you can slow down the breath. And when breath slow down, the heart pumping comes down. And withdrawal happens from the senses. That means sound. So what happens in the night when we sleep? There's a total withdrawal from the senses. So we don't notice sounds and other things beyond a certain threshold level. So that thing happens. We can do it. We can. So this is what in meditation what we do is withdrawing. There are various techniques. This is one technique which we follow. There's an Om technique where a lot of people chant Om. But what is that the Om? We all, even science says that there's a cosmic hum that happens, which it's happening in the entire universe. So this is the one that has been born right the moment of the Big Bang or whatever we call it. The thing has come out. So we can, when we close our this earlids, and there's a practice we do, Om technique. We just chant a little for some time Om, and then suddenly you will find sounds coming from within the body. And so that's the sound. It's not exactly Om. It's something like a motor running, motor gushing forth. Various sounds come. These are chakras and other things are there. I'm not getting to all that. There's a Kriya Yoga technique where we take breath consciously. It is done. But all these techniques are what they do is they quieten the mind to very Kriya Yoga is a very powerful technique, and it's unless people are used to meditating for at least 1 year, at least half an hour, or at least only then it is given. It is not given to everybody. But it's a very powerful technique that will immediately still your mind. There are higher kriyas also. These come as you go by, as you are doing it. So what does all these techniques do? It actually they gives you concentration. Pratyahara happens. Concentration. What do you do with the concentration? Where do you place this concentration? Then the three things that come: dharana. So there are various aspects, of God, love, light. You can see light or love. You can feel love, peace. Suddenly, you'll find sudden drop in the entire activity level, peace. So you sit in that, in that. And the Om vibration when we are doing, suddenly you'll get lost. So you go in that, you merge with that sound. Then dhyana. That's when the meditation. The techniques are not meditation. They only take you there. The real meditation is when you are actually experiencing that merger with God. This happens. So after techniques, people sit, and this is where actual tapas is the one what they call. That happens, and then it leads to samadhi. Samadhi means there's a total oneness with God. In that also there are various stages. Only for that moment you are there. When you come back, you are normal. There are some like the great saints. They are in nirvikalpa samadhi. Even though they come back, they retain that union with God all the time, and they are the ones. Ramana Maharshi. These are the people. Sai Baba. They are the ones who have come to the higher stages of samadhi. So this is the one that, therefore, having become calm, subdued, quiet, patiently enduring and collected. All these things happen during meditation. One sees the self just in the self. That means you see the merger that happened. The stillness is what we are trying to achieve. So it's, the meditation, this is a bit superfluous because already covered in a way, is reuniting the soul with the spirit. So the breath is the cord that ties between soul to the physical body. So breathlessness is deathlessness. So by slowing down the breath, we are enhancing our life. There are some aids, which are generally followed. Heavy eating, and bathing before meditation, self-control. You start exercising moderation during the day. This is what I had said. That link, the greatest gift by saints and yogis of India, the pranayama yoga. So practice of meditation, observing breath makes it slow down, and the dynamo of the heart widens. This anybody can practice, but in that posture, so what I said, so those things help. The heart, in turn, when heart beat comes down, the five senses, they start subsiding. Waves of breath ceases. So this is the process that happens during meditation. The realization that we are the soul and not the body. So this thing happens very early in life. What are the signs of spiritual progress? You feel a lot of peacefulness and understanding. See, this is one thing very. The wisdom comes within from when you are in touch with that regularly, morning and evening. Your understanding levels go up. We find answers to the day-to-day problems that we face, and mental and a lot of efficiency comes. A lot of we do a lot of unnecessary things, unnecessary thought process. So all these are cut. Mental and physical efficiencies come. So that's why you see people who are who are living in the world and who are in this state. They work at the peak levels of efficiencies. There's a love of meditation. You experience that you want to sit and meditate. You want that communion during the day. These are some of the things, the desire to sit and do these things. These are all signs that you're making progress. Some personal experiences, I've talked about theory till now, but what did I learn? This have I learned all this? As time goes by, intuition grows. This is where this happens, because this will happen only when you start listening. I see. I have, for example, one day I just sat in my car and I was going to the airport, and suddenly I realized came to me that my son is coming from Pune. He has the keys, but so feeling came to me that he may forget the keys. And so I took my house keys and put it in behind the front row, the pouch I put. So as soon I went to Delhi that day, Delhi or someplace I went. After I reached, my son had come home and suddenly he calls me up and says, I have forgotten the keys. So I told him it's in the car, and the driver brought him from airport. So you see the key will be there. So this sort of things, you get a lot of messages during the day, but we ignore them. The mind says, no, this can't be, this doesn't stand to logic. So we ignore these things. But once you actually start listening, nothing is coincidence. Things happen. There's a messages that are coming from the universe, through friends, through whatever medium that I am inclined to listen. I am inclined to follow. These messages are coming, and if I start listening to them and with faith I start acting on them, I can see the whole pattern of life emerging in front of me. So this is what happens. I'm talking from my personal experience. So, and lesser use of mind. We are no more the thing to be one up on another, thing to be better, the need to be excellent, the need to be better than others. These sort of urges go away, and we start doing things for the right reasons. We do the right things for the right reasons. Thoughts leading to actions. So these are some of the things I have listed down. I think I'm crossed 1 hour part. Uh, this another thing what I have learned from personal thing is a lot of good and bad experiences we get. I'm not really that much concerned with good experiences because we are happy, we enjoy them. The bad experiences are the things that persistently happen again and again to us. That means the universe is telling us, look, Baba, there's something you need to change. You need to look at these things differently. Change. What is it that we need to change? How we look at things, our attitudes, our opinions, how we treat our people. So something, there's a prod that is coming to us. So when such a thing comes, every time something comes, you have to pause and think. I do that and see what is it that this world is, universe is telling me. And I need something. Some realization. The answer also comes from within. That yeah, I do this. When you ask the question, the answer comes instantly. That's what God responds instantly, and He responds by single words, not through discourses. So this response comes. So we need to follow lamb-like. This has a cumulative effect. It keeps on multiplying it. So this is what it does to your life. This meditation and so once we learn the lesson, you'll be amazed. It will never come to you again. That experience will never come to you. So this I can tell from my personal. There are times in life we may have caused pain to others. So some suffering we need to undergo. I'm not going into that theory of karma and all. I'm not an expert in that. To the extent what is happening within me, I try to. If something painful happens, I see what is the message. Sometimes I have to go through some pain. Let me go through that cheerfully and accept this as a God-given thing. And what am I to learn from this? Maybe I'm learning endurance. So these are some things, that once we learn that, life becomes joyful, happy. And when a need is there, when a need comes, the universe meets it. Rama himself is an example. He keeps telling us, when there's a need, always things appear. And I have experience like that. Never God fails us. This much I can tell. Who is the Guru? God himself is the Guru. He's sitting inside us. He is teaching us through various people or through medium or through persons. Whomever we are listening through them, he comes. But ultimately, that's what my Guruji Paramahamsa Yogananda says. I'm not the Guru. God himself is the Guru. Through me, he tells. Through scriptures, through whatever you are inclined to listen, through that he will tell. He is speaking to you. So you listen and go on the path. I think I have something on Guru disciple, but I would like to end here. I've taken 5 more minutes. Thank you. This is a wonderful poem about Guru, and what Guru does to you. I want to read this. Kabir has written this. It is the mercy of my true Guru that has made me know the unknown. I have learned from him how to walk without feet, to see without eyes, to hear without ears, to drink without mouth, to fly without wings. I have brought my love and meditation to the land where there is no sun and moon, nor day and night. Without eating, I have tasted the sweetness of nectar, and without water, I have quenched my thirst. Where there is the response of delight, there is the fullness of joy. Where there is the response of delight, there is the fullness of joy. Before whom can that joy be uttered? Kabir says, Guru is beyond words, and great is the good fortune of the disciple.
Wonderful, beautiful. You have the Hindi word for this?
Before you go further, where there is a response of delight, there is the fullness of joy. This I have seen several times when I have traveled with Rama to Narmada. He just sits there and his tears keep flowing. So there is a response. The river has that connection that brings so much of joy, tears of joy to him. How can that happen? Do we let it happen? Such a thing happen to us? So there are two things, what the river does to us, and am I letting it happen? So Rama lets it happen to him. That's how it's happening. I'm through. Thank you.